What we found was that sperm count and concentration had declined very significantly. So there was about a 50% decline in 39 years. By any measure, this is very, very scary. And perhaps most alarming was that when we asked, is this slowing down? We saw no change in the slope as you came closer to the present.
Family building is supposed to be easy, and it can be a shock when it's not. The roller coaster ride of infertility can be a mix of emotions and conflicting advice along the way. As a reproductive endocrinologist and former fertility patient, I not only help patients build families every day, but I remember what the ride was like for me. Hang on tight as we learn together from experts and share stories from infertility warriors with compassion. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, and this is Baby or Bust. Male fertility has declined dramatically over the generations. Today's men have almost 60% less sperm than their parents or grandparents. And less sperm means less fertility. But why? New research points to toxins in the environment as the likely culprit. You can decrease your exposure to these toxins and measurably improve your fertility. Otherwise, the consequences are ugly, even calamitous, because a species that can't produce eventually goes extinct. Today, I'm thrilled to have Dr. Shanna Swan on the show. Dr. Swan is an award-winning scientist and researcher based at Mount Sinai in New York. She's published over 200 scientific papers, including a 2017 paper on declining sperm counts that went viral. Her book, Countdown, is an exploration of that 2017 paper and the impact of toxins on our reproductive and overall health. Dr. Swan, thank you so much for being here today. Tell me, are humans on their way to extinction?
Thank you so much for having me, and I really am looking forward to our conversation. As to your dramatic question, I would say probably not, but we should worry about it. I say probably not because I think that assisted reproductive technology is able to do amazing things, and it will probably get more amazing as time goes on. The other reason I think probably not is that I have faith that we will recognize this crisis and take steps to avert it.
And you do such a wonderful job of really going through a lot of the hard science that makes us ask that extinction question. So you point out that sperm counts are dramatically lower, that miscarriage rates are increasing by 1 percentage point each year, that the population is decreasing worldwide. So you really have pointed out a lot of very important information that we need to listen to. How did you get interested in this very important topic?
Well, I was studying the role of the environment in actually miscarriage way back when I was in the California Department of Health. That was very intriguing to me and still is. But I was then asked to join the National Academy of Sciences committee on what they were calling hormonally active agents in the environment. And that was a turning point for me because I had never heard of these chemicals, which we now call endocrine disruptors.
What are those?
Those are chemicals that can interfere with our body's natural hormones. You, as an endocrinologist, of course, are aware of the ability of chemicals to hijack our testosterone, our estrogen, other hormones, the importance of developmental impacts of that hijacking, and which is what I study. But back then I didn't because I hadn't ever heard of them. The committee was looking at this paper that came out of Denmark in 1992 that said sperm counts had declined dramatically over the past 50 years. 1992, okay? Long time ago, right? Mm-hmm. So when I looked at that paper, I was skeptical. So I asked, as many people did, maybe the method of counting sperm has changed. That could make the count go down if you counted fewer sperm per sample. Maybe the kind of men that you included in the study had changed, so that maybe later on you were including more men who were less fertile and earlier more fertile. Or maybe they were more obese, or maybe they were smoking more. I decided this was an important enough question that I would really try to answer it. And I took 6 months and devoted that 6 months to getting the underlying 61 studies that had made that Danish paper possible. And then I looked for all of these factors. How were sperm counted? How were the men recruited? What were the men like? And so on and so forth. And we put this all in a model and ran the model to look for the decline. It was staggering because it had not changed at all.
Meaning that the sperm counts went down, even though the people that you're testing or the confounders or the things that could impact sperm count, like smoking and weight, that did not change. Truly, these sperm counts had fallen, and you tried to prove it wrong, but you couldn't.
That's right. So I could ignore it, or I could think about why is it happening. I decided that if sperm counts had declined, then environment has to play a role. It was too fast to be genetic. 2 generations, 50 years, right? It's not going to be evolutionary change.
And it's a 60% decline in total sperm counts in 2 generations.
Actually, the first study wasn't quite 60, but it was close. It was very significant. And so I said, okay, so how do we figure out if environment affects sperm count or semen quality, right? I thought, well, if we could replicate a semen collection study in multiple places with different environments, we could see whether the sperm was different today. We didn't need to look in the past. We could just say, is the environment affecting sperm count? To do that, I thought, well, how do I get these men? I don't want to just put out an ad and have them answer, because that's going to be biased. The people who answer an ad like that are going to either think they're really proud of their sperm count or maybe really worried about their sperm count, So in order to get a representative sample, I decided to go to a prenatal clinic. And that's because at a prenatal clinic, you're going to get everybody. So that was the design of the study. And what we found was pretty amazing. It turned out that men in central Missouri had only half as many moving sperm as men in Minneapolis.
So the rural population had a significantly lower sperm count. That is opposite. You would think there would be pollution in the city. We think about chemicals. We imagine pollution being something like smog, and you can see it in the city. And you think like, oh, well, and, out in the fields and the farms and in nature, it's going to be, less toxic. This is fascinating.
Yes. So then I asked why. And I thought about and looked into what was different about central Missouri and Minneapolis. And the striking thing is the number of acres in farming in the community that was recruited into the prenatal clinic. So there were way more acres in farming in central Missouri, you can imagine, than in Minneapolis. And then I looked into what was grown on those farms. And then I thought of pesticides. And strikingly different levels of pesticides in the bad semen men and the good semen men. And these were not agricultural workers, by the way. These were people just living there. So they were getting this through their water, through their air, through foods they bought in the grocery store, but they didn't probably have separate foods, different foods from Minneapolis, because foods are shipped all over. So it's got to have been an environmental exposure, and it significantly affected the sperm count. After that, I really believed that chemicals in the environment mattered for sperm count.
So this study, a meta-analysis, means you're taking this data from 7,500 studies looking at sperm counts, and you're trying to combine all of this hard research to see if it really is true that the sperm counts are declining.
So what we found was very strong, very conclusive evidence that sperm count and concentration had declined very significantly in those 39 years concentration dropped from 99 million sperm per milliliter and then went down to 47. So that's about half. So there was about a 50% decline in 39 years, which is about 1.3% per year, I think. If you go to count, which is the total number of sperm in the man's sample in the ejaculate, that went even farther down. That was a drop of 59% in the same time because volume went down some and concentration went down. And when you multiply those, you get count, and that went down even more. So by any measure, this is very, very scary, dramatic, and perhaps most alarming was that when we asked, is this slowing down? We saw no change in the slope as you came closer to the present.
Wow. So we're like on a downhill ski run.
Exactly.
I think one thing that's really important is just the concept of, okay, well, how much sperm do you need to make a baby? As a lay person, they would say like, gosh, millions of sperm, that sounds great. But the issue is you do actually need at least 15, 20 million sperm in a sample to have a good chance of conceiving, naturally or with low-tech treatment. And if we go from 100 million to 50 million, it's like, when are we going to hit that most people have lower than 10 million sperm count? That's where this clickbait, exciting headlines that you're causing all over the world. It's like, well, when do we hit that threshold? And that's what people are worried about. And it's not slowing down.
Let's remember that these sperm have to also be healthy. They have to be shaped well. We can't have any two headers or two tailors. We can't have anything too elongated or too round. So all these conditions of what's called morphology, shape, play a big role and affect whether the sperm is actually going to deliver the goods. And when you get to how many sperm actually can do the job, the numbers get small fast. And then I haven't mentioned there's also the problem of DNA fragmentation or chromosomal damage, which many, many sperm have, particularly caused by the environmental factors we're going to talk about. It turns out if you have above 50, it doesn't matter. 80 sperm count, 80 million versus 50 million doesn't make any difference. It's enough. When you get down to 40, then things start to get a little dicey. And below 40, it takes longer and longer, more cycles to conceive dramatically as you get lower and lower sperm. So 40, think about that number 40. We're at 47 now, or we were in 2011. I'm not sure where we are now. We're looking into that. This is a delicate place that we're in now as a species, actually.
You have taken years to look at a trend in lowering sperm counts. You worked really hard to make sure that that data was actually true, that truly sperm counts had declined over decades. And the facts are that the sperm count is on a slope, it's on a decline. And you've also pieced together that one of the main reasons are the toxins in our environment. And there's other examples of this. Miscarriage rates are up. Women's fertility is down. Populations are down. There's multiple factors, of course, that are involved in this. But you've also shown in animal models and in human models that it truly is the toxins that are in our home that are playing a huge role. You talk a lot about phthalate syndrome, for example. Phthalates are the chemicals that make plastics soft, and they're also in a lot of beauty products to help fragrance stay around in products or help with the absorption of lotions into our skin. I learned that from your book. I talk a lot about phthalates, but I had never learned that actually one of their uses in beauty products is to help with absorption. So they're helping getting them in our body.
It helps the pesticides get into the plants as well. And so it's added to pesticides. And anything that we want to be absorbed through a membrane, like our skin, put the phthalates in there and it'll help, yes.
And you showed in animal models that if you're giving phthalates to animals, that certain things are happening with their reproduction, miscarriage rates, and passing it down to future generations. 95% of Americans tested by the CDC have phthalates in their system at any given time. And we get rid of them quickly, like within 48 hours. So the fact that means that we're being exposed to them all the time.
Colleagues in the National Toxicology Program had fed these to pregnant rats. And those dams, the mothers, gave rise to offspring, male offspring, that had their genital development was incomplete. So I was intrigued by that, and I read those papers, and I saw that, yes, when the mother was given these phthalates at the certain time in pregnancy, time is critical, that their sons, well, they're not called sons, I guess, male offspring, had smaller genitals.
And by the way, everybody's ears just perked up.
Yeah, right.
Right? So women who are thinking about getting pregnant and they're like, oh my gosh, my son is going to have a small penis.
Yes.
Or men who are like, oh my gosh, wait, you just said genitals were smaller. Right. What? So we all perked up when you said that.
Yeah, and that's good because I think it's really serious. Could that be happening to humans? And what we found was, just as in the animals, when the mother had higher levels of phthalates in her urine, the boys had a shorter anogenital distance, a smaller penis, more likely to have undescended testicles, and we showed the phthalate syndrome in humans. So that was a really big result. We had a really clear evidence that phthalate exposure, which is in our everyday products, phthalates make plastic soft and flexible. They're in the rubber ducky, they're in the shower curtain, they're in tubing, they're in our plastic food containers. Those phthalates, when the mother gets exposed to them, goes into her bloodstream, goes into her urine, crosses the placenta, goes into the fetus, and changes, here's the kicker, the amount of testosterone that the fetal testes are producing. And that's why this happens. This was found out only later. This anogenital distance and these measures are controlled by how much testosterone the fetal testicles produce in early pregnancy.
You're literally showing that these chemicals that are in our homes, if they're in high levels in our bodies, especially when women are pregnant with boys, that the boys will be born with genital changes. We didn't realize that things that women were exposed to while they were pregnant impacted babies for the longest time. In science, we thought the placenta was like this wall, this protective barrier. And it's really only recently that we've realized just how important that developmental stage and exposure during that time is. But why should we care? Especially if maybe sperm counts are okay now to reproduce, and maybe someone's out there sort of saying, well, I don't really want to have kids anyway.
I guess I'd just like to say that there's a female side to this story as well. If you look at testosterone in early pregnancy, there's a lot of it in genetic males, and there's much less in genetic females. And the genetic male needs that to develop normally, but the female needs not to have a lot of testosterone there. And if she sees too much testosterone, she will develop in this more male typical way. And we saw that in our study.
Yeah, so you're talking about a really common hormonal disorder, PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, that impacts 1 in 10 reproductive age women. It's a hormone imbalance where there's more male hormones circulating. Are you saying that women who have PCOS that are pregnant, they're going to have higher levels of these hormones in pregnancy, and that might impact the developing fetus?
I'm saying it does. You know, we measured this distance, which is a marker, it turns out, of how much androgen was present, how much testosterone was present in the fetal environment. So these girls had longer anogenital distance. Not just our study, other people have shown that as well. And also girls who have a genetic disorder, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is also associated with higher testosterone, have a longer anogenital distance. So it can go for both male and female. And I think the important thing is that this little easy to measure marker is is actually kind of brilliant because it tells us what happened in utero, how much androgen there was, and what's going to happen in the future in terms of fertility.
Are you seeing similar impact in females and egg health and other issues like miscarriage?
First of all, I should say I originally studied miscarriage. That was my area of focus originally. I did a lot of work on chlorination byproducts and miscarriage risk and so on. However, when it comes to egg health, this is not as evident as sperm health. So yes, we've studied females and we know that environmental chemicals affect female reproductive health in many ways.
Does lower sperm counts or the AG distance, these exposures to toxins, do they also impact other aspects of health beyond fertility?
Absolutely. And I think that couples who are trying to get pregnant, for them, this is the most important thing. But I think every man should have his sperm count measured right now, actually. I mean, women go to get checked. They go to the OBGYN every year, usually. But men don't. You see, the man's sperm count, he just assumes he's good to go. If he can ejaculate, he's good to go. But in fact, you can have a good semen volume and have very poor semen quality.
Yes. As a fertility doctor, I can absolutely attest to that. A lot of men are very hesitant to get a semen analysis. It's very awkward. And they argue like, oh, I've caused a pregnancy before, or, oh, I don't have any symptoms. Like, I don't have any sexual dysfunction. I'm good to go. I don't want a semen analysis. But you are exactly right. 50% of the time, there's a male factor as a part of a fertility evaluation.
This measure that you could get right now by going to have your sperm checked would tell you something about your health throughout life, and would even tell you something about your longevity, because it turns out that men with low sperm count die earlier. The other reason this is important is that the man can do something about this low count. So in the book, we talk about this really interesting example of a man who went to a sperm bank. He was a regular donor. He had good sperm. And then one day he came in and he didn't make the cut. And they said, "What's happening? What have you changed?" And he said, "Well, have a new girlfriend. She smokes. Changed my job. It's more stressful. Have less time to exercise, et cetera, et cetera." So they said, "Well, go home and clean up your act and come back.
Get a new girlfriend." No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Well, she actually stopped smoking and was able to moderate his stress levels. And he came back in 3 months and he was good to go. I think that one thing you can do by getting your sperm tested now, before you need it, as it were, is that you can ensure or help ensure that you're going to be able to conceive a baby when you want to.
What do you say to people that say, the world is overpopulated anyway, so why should we care about this?
Yeah, that is a common pushback I get. So here are some answers. First of all, I think that people have the right to have a pregnancy and a healthy pregnancy when they want it. Telling an infertile couple, well, there's plenty of children in the world, that's not going to make them feel any better. I think we're talking about basic rights here. Secondly, even though there are a lot of people in the world, that number is coming down fast. And if you look at the data from the World Bank, it's actually declined 50% in 50 years. And this is not only in Western countries, this is in countries that had very high rates of fertility in the past. And we're now down at 2.4 children per couple worldwide. At 2.1, we are able to replace ourselves. So we're very close to replacement worldwide. However, many countries are way below replacement. We're below replacement. And in countries like Japan and Korea, they're at 1.0, or I haven't confirmed this, 0.85 in Korea, which is incredibly low. Okay, so what is the government doing about this? It is trying to get up the birth rate by offering financial incentives to couples to have a child, by giving them housing that they're paid for, and they can't do it. People will not change their behavior. And this is what the demographers predicted. When people realize the lifestyle they can have and the changes that they can have by having few or no children, they are not going to go back to having multiple children.
When you think about the headlines in the papers that talk about the birth rates are declining and people aren't having enough children to replace or pay taxes or support a generation that's getting older, the blame always comes back on women. Oh, well, in Western countries where there's access to birth control, people are waiting to have children later and that's why they're not having as many. But you're offering a slightly different look into actually there can be a population that does want to have children. It's just taking them longer because their reproductive health is being impacted by toxins. And you're focusing on men too, which is very different from anything. Reproduction issues have always been blamed on women forever. And you're offering a very different idea and way to think about it.
For such a long time, we have denied this problem. We have denied that we have, as a species, a reproductive problem. It's sort of the hidden crisis, if you will. With the global crisis, the climate change, we recognize this is the hidden crisis. And the more that we have podcasts like this and interviews and my book and lots of other people I hope will write about this so that we bring this out into the open. It's very embarrassing to talk about, isn't it? People are not happy to talk about their sperm counts being low or their multiple miscarriages or their failure to conceive a pregnancy. This is not a cocktail party talk. And so I think as long as it's kept in the closet, if you will, we can't really address it. It's not really our responsibility to worry about what's in our products. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. And because these chemicals are not tested properly, and most of them not tested at all, we have little recourse. We have no defense. And on top of that, when a product turns out to be shown to be harmful, like bisphenol A, so bottles are labeled bisphenol A free.
Or BPA. I think people would think of BPA free. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then people don't know that they've been kind of duped, because now instead of containing bisphenol A, it contains a lookalike, bisphenol F or bisphenol S. And so that is kind of a dirty trick to play. And we call that regrettable substitution. And that's going on all the time. It's been going on for, it happened with flame retardants. It happened with PCBs, keep changing the actors. And so you can say, oh, we don't make those anymore. But we don't talk about what we do make now. And so I think we really have to, as a society, demand better testing of the products in our everyday lives.
We assume that the FDA is going to protect us, right?
Yeah. So the FDA does a good job with drugs, right?
Correct.
Now, it does a good job with drugs. And so that's like with a current vaccine, testing. We all are aware of this now, that these are tested. There's random trials and, phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 and all this. But really, the same thing should be happening for products that are introduced into our bodies, because just as drugs get into our bodies, these chemicals get into our bodies. Food is of great concern, and when possible, if you can eat unprocessed food, then you'll avoid a lot of the bad actors. That said, not everybody has access to unprocessed food. Not everybody can afford it. I would say eat organic food. If you can afford it, you'll be avoiding the pesticides, you'll avoid some phthalates and other contaminants. And as far as your other products, I would say you can go online and you can look for yourself for websites that say safer cosmetics, safer cleaning products. One of those places you'll be sent is to Environmental Working Group, but there are many others. And so I think recognizing that you have to question what's brought into your home and put on your skin, etc., is the first step.
So another great tip I often tell my patients is really try to go fragrance-free.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And why is that?
Well, so I'll just tell you, in our study, we asked women to tell us everything they used in the 24 hours before they gave their sample. So what they put on their face and was it fragranced? And then we linked their levels of phthalates and phenols and parabens to what they told us. And what we found was that fragrance was the clearest signal that we got for the presence of many of these chemicals. So avoid those room fresheners, avoid those tags you hang in your car. And by the way, that new car smell is not a good smell for you. Try to avoid fragrance in soaps and detergents and so on.
I do try to talk to people just about how fast our bodies do get rid of these compounds. So if you make changes, it can be really helpful quickly. Would you like to speak to that? Because it's nice to make sure people realize that changes that they make really do make a difference.
Sure. The chemicals that were made a long time ago, the historic chemicals, the legacy chemicals, if you will, are what we call persistent. So they are stored in fat, and they're bad actors for sure. And they're also stored in the environment. But the ones we've been talking about mostly today, the phthalates and the bisphenols and some of the more modern chemicals, are actually non-persistent. They can be excreted through urine. And they're excreted, the half-life is actually 4 hours for most phthalates. So if we can get them out of our bodies and don't keep taking them in again, that's the trick, then we're good to go.
How can we find you? How can we find your book? How can we learn more about you, follow you?
My website is shannaswan.com. It's very easy, SHANNA.com. The book is Countdown. You can Google Countdown the book. And by the way, make sure you put in 2 words.
Thank you again so much.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you for being here today. It was a true honor to interview Dr. Shanna Swan. She and her exhaustive research have shown the true impact of environmental toxins on our reproductive health, and it is an absolute wake-up call. She has shown without a doubt that household toxins like phthalates and BPA are truly impacting not only our reproductive health, but our overall health. With this knowledge, we can now take action to reduce our exposure to these harmful chemicals and improve our overall health and well-being. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, and this is Baby or Bust. If you like this episode, let us know. Give us a 5-star review and follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Baby or Bust is produced by Mark Ramsey, Jamie Solis, and Greg Moga. Executive produced by Paul Anderson, Nick Pinella, and Andrew Greenwood for Workhouse Media. Baby or Bust is a Mark Ramsey media production.